so welcome everybody. Welcome back. We're going to talk some more about iconic plants of Australia. And I think we're just going to get right into it. Last week we identified where Australia is in space. You can see that it's in the southern hemisphere, just south of the equator. And I'm going to try and use my cursor as a pointer. Sometimes it makes the slides advance, which is not ideal, but I'll see what I can do with it. So here we are up in Canada. Leave from Vancouver, fly for 15 hours to get to the east coast of Australia. So we've arrived in Australia, and the area of Australia where we're based is right here on the east coast, about 400 kilometers north, south, and west of Brisbane. And as you can see, it's a subtropical area, has lots of different habitats, and we're going to explore plants that come from those habitats. So we're going to start with the myrtle family. We're going to start with eucalypts. And a more iconic Australian species would be hard-pressed for us to find. We've all heard of the eucalyptus. And I'm using a name, kind of a common name, eucalypt. And that name includes 3 different genera. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, when we talk about a eucalypt, we talk about the Eucalyptus genus, we talk about the Corymbia genus, and we talk about the Angophora genus. And I'll make that a little more understandable as we have species from each of those genera, and I'll show you at least one example of each tonight. They've evolved from rainforest trees, as did Banksia, about 30 million years ago, as drought and nutrient-poor soils and fire became more common in the landscape, and as the rainforest contracted up into higher elevations where there was more rainfall, these other species became dry adapted to the new conditions in Australia. So the eucalypts are found in almost all climatic conditions in Australia. You can see top left, we've even got a eucalypt in the outback, which is kind of fun. The orange soil indicating its poverty compared to other soils. There's a eucalypt growing right on the beach as well in the bottom picture. And the distribution map top right shows us that the eucalypts are found in every state, in every territory of Australia, but not in the rainforests, not in the most central areas here of the country, which are the most arid. We're up in the Great Dividing Range, but we're on our way down. So temperatures are increasing, rainfall is decreasing, and soils have become poorer. But the eucalypts have adapted to these conditions, and they're actually the most common forest type in Australia. So 75% of the forests in Australia are eucalypt forests. And what kind of forest arises and what kind of plants join in that eucalypt community really depends on the things that I just mentioned. How much rainfall there is, what the temperatures are, the soil fertility, the depth of the soil, and the drainage of the soil. And on the left-hand side, we have a wetter eucalypt forest. It receives more rainfall. It's got an understory that's fairly developed and has ferns as a ground cover. On the right-hand side, this was taken on Fraser Island or Gari, a sand island. And we can see that the trees are much more widely spaced, and the understory consists primarily of grasses in that dry eucalypt habitat. So we've got some eucalypts on the left in Wallam woodland. We're really getting to know that Wallam environment. It's located close to the coast, but on the back dune and further back. So these trees too are growing on sand. On the right-hand side, we see a dry eucalypt forest. It has a little more rainfall, probably richer soils, and we have a really nice shrubby kind of understory, and there's Banksia growing here in the middle. I just wanted to give you a little tease about the flowers and the leaves of the eucalypt. We've been looking at a lot of trunks. And so I just wanted to show you how spectacular the flowers look. And we'll let you figure out what these spiky flower parts are. So you can think about that, and we'll talk about it in more depth in a second. These are the woody seed capsules. We've seen this with Banksia, very protective against predation and against hot weather and fire. And the eucalypt leaves are on the left, the adult leaves. They're fascinating, lots to be said about those too. And this is a Queensland blue gum, Eucalyptus terraticornis, which is very common in the area that we're based. So just to talk about a couple of specific eucalypts, this Eucalyptus regnus is the tallest flowering tree on the planet, okay, which is absolutely incredible. It can reach 100 meters in height. It can live for 400 years. It's not a native of our own area, though. It grows further south in Tasmania and in Victoria, where it's cooler. It is the tallest flowering plant, and the tallest conifer, gymnosperm, of course, is the East Coast redwood, the Sequoia sempervirens on the west coast of North America. And that's the one you've probably heard of in terms of height. I didn't know myself that the Eucalyptus regnus was the tallest flowering plant on the planet, but there you have. And it's considered a valuable timber tree. Most of it's been cut down, but there are still stands left in parks, of course. This is a fun species. It's called rusty gum, and it is a native of Southeast Queensland, where we are. And it really illustrates the gum aspect of things. I don't know, you might have heard eucalypts called gum trees. Well, this is why. Because when they are damaged, either by insects, mechanically, by cutting in any other way, or in any way, they secrete a resin. And it's a red resin. It's called kino. The Aboriginal peoples called it that. And it serves a protective function for the tree. And the early settlers took a look at this resin, decided that it was a gum, so called the trees gum trees. But of course, it's not a gum. It's not water soluble like gums are. It's a resin. But we call the trees gum trees anyway. This is called scribbly gum. It's a Eucalyptus racemosa. And this one is fun because it is colonized by the scribbly gum moth. So, which makes little tunnels underneath the bark. And when the bark falls off, we can see the tunnels. I'm kind of hoping you can see the tunnels there. It's my cursor's going over the wood. And this is a tree that's very common in Southeast Queensland. On the right, you can see it growing in the Wallam, and we've actually visited it before. We saw this picture last week, I believe. It's growing on sand, very thriving, in fact, in this very nutrient-poor habitat, evolved to and adapted to do so. Here we are with the flowers again of the eucalypt, and the flowers are absolutely stunning, as you can see. And the spiky parts of the flower are, in fact, you might have guessed, the stamens of the flower. They're most prominent when we look at the flower. Usually flowers have 20 to 30 stamens in a circle like that. Some flowers may have up to 100. The more stamens, the more pollen, the more pollen, the more pollination. So as you probably know, we have the anther at the tip of the stamen, and it's the anther that produces the pollen, or it certainly carries the pollen for dissemination. And very many stamens on this particular flower. Another cool thing about the flower is that the sepals and the petals have joined together and adapted to become what's called an operculum, which is a little cap that goes on top of the stamens as they develop and protects them from the sunshine and from the heat. And when the stamens are ready to bloom or to manifest, the operculum falls off and the stamens are revealed. That is a really neat adaptation in itself. I'll just mention that, you might be thinking, how is it possible that the flowers don't self-pollinate? And they have a mechanism, and it's not unique to the eucalyptus. But what happens is the stamens have the pollen, they release the pollen before the female part of the flower is receptive to receive the pollen. So here we have the pistil here in the center, and it cannot and is not receptive to receive the pollen yet, which prevents it from being self-pollinated by its own stamens. I'm just going to, because we're talking about pollination, I'm just going to move to the next slide. And this, again, here is the Eucalyptus terreticornis here on the right, the Queensland blue gum. Beautiful tree. And it is a tree that is pollinated not just by insects, but by animals as well. These are rainbow lorikeets, beautiful little parrot that comes to visit the Queensland blue gum. It's also pollinated by bats, by honey eaters, which are honey eaters are Australian birds as well. But most of the pollination of the eucalyptus or the eucalypts are done by insects, as you can see up here. If we go backwards, so insects, bees, wasps, beetles, etc. So yes, we've gone backwards. So after pollination, we see the formation of the woody seed capsule, and that's familiar too. The Banksia also had a woody seed capsule. And here it is here. So the seed is developing within this capsule, and when the seeds are mature and ready to be released, the valve, which is here, will release the seeds, and the seeds are very, very tiny, and they'll be dispersed on the wind. And these seed capsules are called gum nuts, obviously, from the gum tree. They're not nuts, of course, and it's not gum, but another misnomer that that has developed up around the tree. It's kind of a friendly way, actually, of talking about them, gum nuts. And as you can imagine, they are protective, these gum nuts, from predation, and they're protective in case of fire as well, to protect those developing seeds from the heat of the fire. So we've talked about the pollinators and the Queensland blue gum. So let's talk about the eucalypt leaves. So the leaves, the adult leaves, all look pretty similar. And there they are on the left. They're kind of a sickle shape, falcate they call it. And they all kind of look alike on all the eucalypt trees. And it makes identifying eucalypts to species pretty difficult. We can't rely on the leaf for identification the way we rely on the leaf to identify our own trees. Instead, we have to look at the gum nuts, we have to look at the bark as well, the flower, if it's blooming, and well, and of course the habitat. And the gum nuts are really quite distinctive, and they do allow differentiation often to species, which is helpful. The leaves are evergreen, so they don't fall off en masse the way our leaves do. They will eventually, each leaf will eventually die and then fall off to be replaced one by another leaf. The leaves are hanging down, and that's a characteristic shape. The adult leaves, I should say. The juvenile leaf is here, and it looks very different. It grows in the understory in the shade, and the eucalypt starts off with a leaf that is opposite, one leaf on either side of the stem. The leaves are round, and they also face upwards toward the sun, whereas the adult leaves, as you can see, are facing downwards. Facing downwards means that the sun hits the adult leaf indirectly and doesn't heat it up as much. So it reduces water loss from the leaf, that position hanging down. In the case of the juvenile, but the downside of that is it doesn't maximize the sunlight for photosynthesis. You can imagine that with the juvenile leaf, a plant that's beginning to grow and that needs as much photosynthesis as possible, that's why we have leaves of a different pattern. They're facing upwards to maximize the sunlight that falls on them, and they're round shape, again, to maximize the photosynthesis that occurs within the leaf. And I'm not sure at what point the juvenile leaves become the adult leaves, but again, that happens probably when the tree is tall enough to begin receiving more sunlight. The leaves as well are thick and waxy because the cuticle secretes a thick and waxy coating that's also protective against the sun, and it helps minimize evaporation and water loss. The coating is also shiny in a lot of species, and that reflects the sunlight, again, to minimize the heating and the amount of water loss that occurs. Another cool thing is the blue-green color, and we can really see it here in the juvenile leaf. That also comes from the coating on the leaf, and the color depends on the thickness and the composition of the coating that's secreted by the cuticle of the leaf. So that's kind of fun. What else? We have in the middle, we have a leaf that we can see through, and all sorts of little dots in the leaf, and they are oil glands. So you've heard of the eucalyptus oil, the eucalyptus smell, and it's because of the oil glands that are found in the leaf. And the more oil glands there are, and the bigger they are, the more fragrant is the leaf, and the more oil is in the leaf. It's big business, essential oils. But the downside of having the oil in the leaf, of course, is that it makes the leaf more flammable and more susceptible to burning and burning quickly. And we'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. So koalas, I'll just mention real quick, the koalas and the eucalypt have evolved together over 25 million years. The koala eats only eucalypt trees, eucalypt leaves rather. Each koala has between 1 and 3 species of eucalypts that it actually feeds on. They eat massive, massive amounts of leaves, and they spend almost 24 hours. They spend 22 hours a day digesting them. The leaves are very nutrient poor. The koalas need a lot of them. And the compound in the leaf that protects the leaf from predation by other herbivores, so it has that really great function, does not affect the koala. The koala has liver enzymes and bacteria in its gut that allows it to digest the eucalypt leaf. And it's not alone. There's a couple of other animals that are able to digest eucalypt leaves as well as the koala. But koala is certainly the most well-known, and they get most of their water from eucalypt leaves as well. So I thought I would mention that. It's a talk on plants, but the koala and the eucalypt are so intertwined that you can't really talk about one without the other. How are eucalypts adapted to fire? Well, we've seen some of, we're looking here at the slide, which shows us some of the same adaptations that we saw last week with Banksia. Top left, we have those woody seed capsules that protect against fire. And in some species of eucalypt, we actually need fire to cause those capsules, those gum nuts, to explode and have the seeds released. Down below, we see that the bark of the eucalypt is also fire resistant. Those epicormic buds, which we see budding here in the middle, are located and they're dormant underneath the bark. So it really serves the eucalypt to have a bark that's fire resistant to protect those dormant buds. And we see after a fire, we see the epicormic buds that are sprouting from the bark, and they will sprout up and down the eucalypt, photosynthesize, and they will be the basis for the regeneration of the tree. Another basis for regeneration the eucalypt has is the lignotuber on the far right. And the lignotuber, as we saw last week, is located at the top of the crown, and it is full of starch, which feeds the developing shoot that is able to sprout from the lignotuber after the fire. So until the plant has leaves and can photosynthesize, that starch in the lignotuber will provide food for the new shoot, the growing eucalyptus, the regenerating eucalyptus. And apparently, these lignotubers can grow up to 5 meters a year, and they can live hundreds of years underneath the soil. And they have been discovered to be 10 feet wide and as deep as 3 feet. So 10 feet wide and 3 feet deep underneath the ground, which is pretty incredible. And the epicormic buds, what was my little fun fact about them? Thousands and thousands of epicormic buds underneath the eucalyptus bark. So all of that means that the eucalypt does not die when there's a fire. Usually it's able to regenerate. And that brings us to a really, really interesting thing about the eucalypt. Not only do they survive well in fire, they actually promote fire and they need fire to thrive. So I'll explain that by saying that as a species, it has characteristics that really make it susceptible to fire and actually facilitate fire in its environment. And one of those characteristics is the really highly flammable oil that it has in its leaves, so much so that on a really hot day, the oil can evaporate into the air and cause kind of a smog. So if there is fire that day, it can be like a fireball and absolutely explode and cause a really hot, fast fire in the canopy. So that can occur. The other thing that happens with the eucalypt in its environment is that there's a tremendous amount of bark that's shed and leaves that are shed over the year. They accumulate on the forest floor. They're not easily decomposed. I think it's because they have phenols, they have chemicals within them that are resistant to decomposition. And as well, the environment is very dry. So the leaves and the litter don't decompose in a dry eucalypt forest the way they would in other forests. So it just continues to accumulate on the ground. There's also loose tree bark generally that hangs off the eucalypt trunk. And in a fire, that catches fire. In the wind, it can throw the fire forward, and it can also throw the fire up again into the canopy. So all that to say that there's a lot going on to kind of encourage fire with the eucalypt. After the fire, we've seen the eucalypts are uniquely adapted to regenerate by the lignotubers and the epicormic buds. The fire has left a fertile layer of ash on the ground with lots of minerals that are soluble and available for new growth to use. The seeds that are shed into the ash are shed into freshly cleared spaces because everything else is burned. So all of this gives the eucalypt a competitive advantage after fire. So it grows more readily after fire than other species that are not as well fire adapted. So it actually and confers that competitive advantage to the eucalypt. It doesn't cause huge damage and it's not disastrous in the ecosystem, however, in Australia, because as we know, the eucalypt is not the only plant that's fire adapted. Other plants are as well. And we saw last week the banksia is, the acacia is, the eucalypt is, other species are. The problem is when you export the eucalypt into other ecosystems in other countries, and then it becomes a huge fire hazard and extremely devastating to the local ecosystems there. The eucalypt has not only adapted to the presence of fire in the environment, it's also adapted to the dry and the nutrient-poor soils. The roots are very deep, very wide. They search for water underground. One of the main adaptations is that the roots have formed symbiotic associations with mycorrhizal fungi. So the plant supplies sugars to the fungi, and the fungi supply water and nutrients to the roots that they otherwise would not have available to them. I don't know too much about this, but I've read that the roots also produce chemical exudates, which break down. They leach into the soil, the chemicals from the roots, and they free up other nutrients that are locked in the poor soils. And the eucalypt can use those nutrients. Eucalypts, as well, apparently, as a plant, are very efficient at using water and nutrients in their own internal systems. So all that means they survive and they thrive in Australia. If we look at the role of eucalypts in the Aboriginal culture, we can well imagine that they were sacred to Aboriginal peoples. And Aboriginal peoples, they burned the leaves, they crushed the leaves, they used the kino resin as an antiseptic for wounds. The wood, eucalypt wood, is really good for didgeridoos and for other musical instruments, canoes, etc. In settler culture, it's often about how the natural resource can be exploited for money. And in the case of the eucalypt, it was very, very much a possibility, and it was exploited. The eucalypt timber is rot resistant. It's extremely fast growing. The eucalypt has been exported around the world to be grown in plantations, and the timber from those trees can be harvested in as few as 15 years, which is pretty amazing. However, as I said, they have become invasive and a fire hazard elsewhere around the world. And we're going to talk about how essential oils from the eucalyptus oil and honey are also big business. But a little bit lighter view of eucalyptus in the settler culture involves the street art that you can see. These are myrtle seed capsules on the left, and I think they're in front of a credit union, which is kind of cool. And on the right, we see the eucalypt leaf in a bench. So the bench has been constructed in the form of the eucalypt leaf. And of course, the street sign. We also have eucalypt in literary culture. This is our friend May Gibbs from last week. And she not only created the big bad Banksia men, but she created the Gumnut Babies. And they're cute little fictional characters that she has drawn. And look, she's put a operculum cap on top of their heads, which is pretty cool. And there's the eucalypt leaf. And we see that she wrote her books about 100 years ago, and they're still being shown to and taught to kids and entertain kids today, which is pretty cool. Tales from the Gum Tree, celebrating 100 years of May Gibbs. I'll also mention in terms of products and influence, the myrtle family also, well, eucalyptus oil is produced from the eucalyptus tree, and I think it's Eucalyptus radiatus that I've got some eucalyptus oil, and I think it's that species that has produced the oil. You may have heard of the tea tree, though, but just an FYI, the tea tree oil is not derived from a eucalyptus. It's derived from a melaleuca, which is also a member of the myrtle family, though. So it's a relative of the eucalyptus, Melaleuca alternifolia. Its flowers are spiky with what I imagine are stamens, and the leaves are really quite different. And bottom left, you can see those trees that have been planted in plantations, and all for the production of the essential oil from a distillation process of the leaves. Honeys, so the flavor of the honey, the color of the honey, the aroma of the honey, it all depends on the flower that the bee derives its nectar from. And the eucalyptus flower produces lots of nectar, produces lots of honey, and some of the kinds of honey are blue gum honey, ironbark, and jarrah honey. Manuka honey is a honey that you may have heard of, and it is not a honey that comes from the eucalyptus genus. It comes from a relative, though, a member of the myrtle family. It comes from the flower and the tree that you can see on the left here, Leptospermum scoparium, and it's a native of Australia and New Zealand. And the honey that it produces, and its common name is the Manuka myrtle shrub. And it's prized as a honey. It has anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antibacterial properties, and it's super, super expensive. A half a cup of the honey might cost you $50 to buy. And before we leave the myrtle family, before we leave the eucalypts, I just wanted to show you this picture from the rainforest that grows on Gowrie Island. And this is a tree that's really, really tall. It's, as I said, it's not a eucalypt, but it is a myrtle. It's Syncarpia hillei or satinae. And if I can do this without it advancing, am down here. So the cursor is right here on my head. So I'm in there for scale. And so this really gives you an idea of the massive, massive size of these trees in the myrtle family that grow in rainforests. So let's leave the myrtles and we'll talk about the acacia family. The acacias are part of, not the acacia family, we'll talk about the acacia genus within the Fabaceae family or the pea family. And acacias are also called wattle. The common name is wattle. Same thing, it evolved from rainforest trees as the country dried out. And you can see from this picture that yes, in fact, it does grow in toward the outback in a really nutrient poor area with not too much biodiversity, not too many species growing. So that's a hallmark of this acacia or wattle. Okay. There are more species of acacias than there are eucalypts, and the acacias will grow in the central area of the country where the eucalypts will not. So they've really exploited that niche of arid land, poor soils. And even though they have colonized all the other terrestrial habitats, including the rainforest, they grow mainly in the arid and the semi-arid regions of Australia. And they put on a beautiful flower display. And that yellow color to the left is characteristic of the wattles, of the acacias. And they also have pale yellow, cream, and white flowers, and they're really quite gorgeous. So this is an example of the kind of habitat that they have colonized toward the outback, where there aren't that many species. Gorgeous Acacia anura on the left, or mulga, and just kind of a general landscape picture on the right. The acacia has adapted to these driest and harshest of regions. They are the second most common forest type after the eucalypts, and they often grow as shrubs or small trees in the understory of the drier forest. And they're surprisingly short-lived. They grow to or live to about 50 years, all told. So I don't want to bury the lead. So one of the most fascinating things about the acacia is that their adult acacia leaves are not actually leaves. They're called phyllodes. Even though they look like leaves, they behave like leaves, they even fall downwards like leaves do. They're not leaves. In fact, what they are is the plant has taken the petiole or the leaf stem. It has been modified, it's broadened, it's flattened, and it's taken over the role of the leaf. So it can photosynthesize and it replaces the leaf. And as I said, they're called phyllodes. So they're an adaptation that the plant has made to hot, arid conditions because the phyllodes is better at conserving water than the leaf is. It is better at conserving water, so not as much water evaporates from the phyllodes as compared to the leaf. It constitutes an evolutionary advantage to the acacia to develop these phyllodes. So I'll just mention two about the phyllodes and the leaves. I mentioned that I'm talking about the adult acacia because the seedling acacia does have the bipinnate fern-like leaves that other flowers or other plants in the pea family have when they're young. They However, when they begin to mature and grow larger, they transfer, if you will, or they move toward the phyllodes type leaf, probably as they grow older and grow higher and are exposed to more heat and more sunshine. They develop the phyllodes. Some plants, some species of acacia will retain that fern-like leaf even into adulthood. And these tend to be the acacia species that are found in the wetter rainforest areas, for instance. And I don't have a picture of that, but I have seen it in real life. Acacia flowers are also interesting. They're like the Banksia. Many, many tiny flowers are grouped on flower heads. And with acacia, there's two kinds of flower heads. One of them is the rounded, as you see up top, and the second is the longer type of flower head, and that's called a rod. And there's that spikiness to the flower, and again, that's the stamens that are prominent with the acacia flower. And on the right-hand side, I found this online, and it's kind of interesting because they talk about the way that the acacia flower prevents self-pollination. So the style of the acacia emerges first, and at the end of this, and the style is the female part of the flower. At the tip of the style is the stigma, which receives the pollen. So if it emerges first before the pollen does, then the chances of self-pollination are reduced. And that's the exact opposite of what happens with the eucalypt. With the eucalypt, the stamens are active first and release their pollen, and later the stigma becomes receptive to the pollen. So that's kind of interesting. Another interesting thing about the acacia flowers is that very little nectar is produced in comparison to the eucalypt that produces a lot of nectar. So given that there's little nectar produced by the acacia, it's really the scent and the color that attract the insects, pollinators, toward the acacia flower. Bees, butterflies, beetles, and wasps are the most important pollinators. And this is a lovely picture on the left of Acacia flavescens, and it grows along the coast, not too far from the beach, but in sandy soil. It grows quite high and really, really has a beautiful display of flowers in the summertime. And on the right-hand side is the seed pods, which look like characteristic bean pea family seed pods. And they are become tough and dry and leathery with age, and they are protective as well against fire and against heat and against predation. I just wanted to show you this slide of just some other flowers in other habitats along the coast, and I took these pictures. This one here on the right-hand side, the Hubbard's wattle, and the one at the top left, they're really quite tiny flowers. You can see with the white one here on the bottom right, the phyllodes are just tiny, tiny triangles. And up with the prickly Moses on the top left, those phyllodes are really tiny as well. And that's protective given that they grow in the Wallam, where it's extremely sunny, extremely hot, and it is a way of compensating for that. The flat-stemmed wattle in the middle and the primrose ball wattle on the other side are showier, both from the point of view of their phyllodes and from the point of view of their flowers. They grow in a soil that's slightly more nutritious, and also the temperatures, I think, are cooler where they grow as well. Let's talk a little bit about how acacias are adapted to fire. The most important thing to note about the acacias is that they actually need fire to germinate. The seeds need fire to germinate. The seeds are released from the seed pods and they fall to the ground and they lie dormant in the soil. And they can lie dormant in the soil up to 20 years waiting for fire to go through. And what happens when the fire goes through is that there's a little plug in the seed that prevents moisture from entering the seed and allowing the beginnings of germination. When the fire goes through, the heat pops that little plug out, and moisture can then enter the seed coat and initiate germination and help initiate the germination of the seed. As well as that, so that's pretty cool. The seeds actually need the fire. They don't germinate if they don't have fire. Um, the other thing that's interesting about the acacia is that it's a nitrogen fixer, but it certainly means that the acacias improve the soil fertility where they are. After a fire, there's lots of ash on the ground. All those seeds can now germinate. So acacia is considered a pioneer species after fire. The bark of the acacia can also be fire resistant depending upon the species. It's very rich in tannins. So let's talk then about the nitrogen fixation abilities of the acacia. So it's pretty great, pretty special. With the help of rhizobia bacteria in the root nodules, the rhizobia bacteria actually convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, into a form that can be used by the plants in the soil. And this is a characteristic shared by members of the bean family. Plants like red clover that grow here also do this nitrogen fixation. So they improve the quality of the soil, the nutrient content of the soil themselves, just by growing there and doing their thing. So it really helps acacia colonize these harsh and challenging environments to have this nitrogen fixing capacity. And the acacias, too, they're actually a plant that is often planted to restore areas of the landscape that have been eroded and need stabilization and need nutrient enrichment. In terms of Aboriginal culture, so the wattle or the acacia is super important. It is a symbol of unity for the Aboriginal peoples as well as for the settler culture because it grows just about everywhere. It is important with natural remedies. It is a wood that boomerangs and other tools are made from. The wood is durable. The wood is resistant to rot. It's a heavy wood. So it's used also for things like fencing, fence posts. For the Aboriginals, though, many species of acacia produce seed that is edible, and it's an important part, has been an important part of the Aboriginal diet, where they grind the seed and they make flour from it as well. And I just want to thank Paul Ryan, who's a friend of mine from Australia, for supplying the pictures of acacia located in the outback habitat. That's a place I haven't been to yet, and this would have been a very different presentation, I think, without his pictures of that habitat and acacia in that habitat. So I say thank you to him. So settler culture, so definitely the acacia wood was exploited. It was known to be very durable, very tough, very hard, resistant to rot. The British Navy actually used it in their sailing ships because of those characteristics. It was also exported to South Africa and planted extensively in plantations in South Africa, one of the species that had bark that was extremely tannin rich. So it was grown to be able to extract that tannin, caused difficulties in South Africa, of course, and is now considered an invasive species there. But for a while, they used it. But here's a slide that's a little bit lighter around the role of acacia in Australian settler culture. And it is actually the Australian floral emblem of the country, the golden wattle, and that beautiful, beautiful golden color to the flower head. It's a gorgeous looking flower. There's even a wattle day in Australia on September 1st. So top right is a bit of an advertisement for Wattle Day. It's big in the schools, and they talk about all the characteristics of wattle that they like and that they want Australians to identify with, like resilience and adaptability. It also stands for renewal and resurgence, partly because of its ability to germinate so nicely after fire goes through. So it's very much valued in the culture. Down underneath on the right-hand side at the bottom is a picture of a $20 bill. And I kind of hope you can see, even though it's not very easy, those little yellow balls. Those are wattle flowers on the $20 bill. It's a species of wattle there. And in fact, on every single Australian bill, there's a different species of wattle that is shown, which is kind of fun. And on this on this $20 bill, there's also the kookaburra that you can see in there along with the wattle. And over on the left-hand side, we have the coat of arms of Australia. The kangaroo and the emu take pride of place, but underneath, there's kind of a stylized drawing of acacia blossoms, and those are the little yellow balls that you see down there. So again, wattle, assuming a really important place in the culture of Australia. So, okay, so we're ready for our next family. These are the casuarinas, casuarina family, Casuariaceae family. A couple of species that I'm familiar with, a couple of genera that I'm familiar with in that family, the casuarina genera and the Alocasuarina genera. The she oak is the common name for this particular plant, but you will not be surprised to hear that it is not related to our oaks in the Northern Hemisphere whatsoever, although the wood kind of reminded the settlers, I think, of the oak wood. Before I forget, we see some birds roosting in this casuarina on the beach, and they're white-capped noddies, which are a form of tern up here.
Oh,
So it's an absolutely beautiful tree. It has characteristics that are similar to the acacia, which is why I wanted to mention it, but I'm not going to talk about it a long time. I did want you to see it. Look at that hanging, gorgeous, needle-like foliage growing right on the beach. And that's a clue to one of the ways that it's similar to acacia. It is also a nitrogen fixer. It's not in the pea or bean family, nor is it related in any way to the acacias, but it shares that nitrogen fixing capacity. So it allows the casuarina to colonize, very inhospitable environments, which it does. It grows as small to medium-sized trees, and as I said, they're found along the coast. Further inland, on the left-hand side, you see a picture of Alocasuarina littoralis, the black she oak, and that's growing in our wallum habitat, our back dune habitat, so it's growing right on the sands. They're able to grow on pure sand because of that nitrogen fixing capacity, but in my reading, it's a different kind of bacteria that fixes the Frankia bacteria that fixes the nitrogen within the root nodules It's not the rhizobia bacteria, I think, that the acacias use. In any case, so they're different in that way. So we have a plant that's able to colonize harsh conditions. We're really getting to know our Wallum habitat. If I can use the cursor and come over, we've got our casuarina here. The foliage isn't hanging, it's kind of pointing upwards in an upright pattern, which is characteristic of this particular species. Down here, we see there's a Banksia growing. And over here is a grass tree. I'm going to talk about grass trees next. But staying with the casuarina, it has another important characteristic that is similar to the acacias. So remember with the acacia, I said that the acacia leaf was not actually a leaf. It's a phyllodes. It's the leaf stalk that has broadened and flattened and taken on the function of a leaf, including photosynthesis. Well, guess what? With the casuarinas, the same thing happens. The casuarina foliage is not leaves, even though it looks like leaves. They're called cladodes. It's not a modified leaf stalk, it's a modified branch. It's a modified stem that has taken on the function of the leaf, including photosynthesis. And the reason that it's done this is the same as for the acacia. It's an adaptive advantage to the hot sun and to the high temperatures because the cladode is better able to conserve water than the leaf is. I've got, though, unlike the acacia, we can see the leaves, the actual leaves of the casuarinas. So what I've done is I've taken off one of the needle-like branchlets from the plant and I laid it out. You can see it in the center. And the actual leaves are tiny, 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 and they're here at the nodes along the branchlets. You can see them there. Maybe you can see my cursor moving. And you can also see the little tiny leaves up here. They look like little teeth, and there's between 5 and 10 of them. Those are the leaves, the actual leaves of the casuarina. And so that's pretty cool. They don't photosynthesize though. They remain there, and they're actually kind of come in handy because the number of leaves that occur at these internodes can actually be used as a clue to diagnose the casuarina to species. So they're characteristic. It's a number characteristic of the species. So it's kind of useful in that way. They're difficult to see though with the naked eye. Sometimes you need a magnifying glass to see the little leaves in different species. And I've got down here a fun fact. I don't know if you've got Christmas cactus at home, that plant, but it also has cladodes. It doesn't have leaves. So if you look at it closely, you can see that its stem, its branches have become flattened and widened, and they perform the role of the leaf to photosynthesize for the plant. So that kind of brings it home a little bit more, a little easier. If you do have a Christmas cactus at home, take a look at it and you'll be able to tell, I think. So the other really cool thing about the casuarina is its flowers. The female flower of the casuarina is here on the slide in the middle, and the female flower parts are the spiky red pom-pom looking things. And they are receptive to pollen that is produced on a separate flower on a separate male flower. Usually, both the female and the male flowers are on the same plant. So the pollen will be released from the male flower. It will be transported by wind. It will fertilize the female flower. And after that happens, when the seeds begin to form, they're enclosed in a seed pod, which we can see on the right hand of the screen. And that's what it looks like. And when the seeds are mature and they're ready to be released, on the left side of the screen, it's not the same species. You can see the hanging foliage on the left, not the same species as the flower and the seed cone, but it does show you nicely what the seed cone or the seed pod looks like once the seeds have been released. You see that open hole that indicates that the seed is not there anymore, so it's fallen to the ground. Anyway, how cool is that? Another weird and wonderful thing about Australian plants. So this is a montane habitat. We see the casuarina growing on the right-hand side of the frame and in the middle of the frame. Soils aren't very thick here, just a little bit of soil on top of the bedrock, but we have casuarina able to grow there all the same, and other species growing there as well. Next and last that we're going to look at is the grass trees. So these are absolutely iconic, absolutely amazing, instantly recognizable plants. Even somebody who knows nothing about botany can recognize and remember this plant. Symbolizes the Australian bush as well. It's beautiful, it's ancient, it's hardy, it thrives in nutrient-poor soils. Also really well adapted to fire, and I'll talk about that. But what we're looking at here is we're seeing the new leaves, and they are leaves, and they're coming from the top of the plant, and they're kind of blue-green in color. And what is surrounding this, what is forming a skirt around the stem of the plant is actually the older leaves that are beginning to decay, but they remain on the plant for a while and form what looks like a hula skirt and an absolutely beautiful sight. The genus is endemic to Australia. They grow practically everywhere, Xantheria grass trees, including the most harsh parts of the country in the central desert, where other plants aren't able to grow. It's called a grass tree, but you won't be surprised to hear that it's neither a grass, even though its leaves look like grass leaves. The leaves are actually they have a really rigid texture, which also might not surprise you, as a lot of the leaves do, that are, hard, and that are dry adapted. There's kind of sclerophyll effect. And these leaves are the same. They're long, they're narrow, they look like grass, but they're rigid in texture. Not a grass and not a tree. There's no woody tissue anywhere on this plant. It's a flowering plant, a monocot, and it's most closely related to lilies. And these grass trees, these xantharias, are acting as sentinels. They're looking over the valley. They are quite old. This is a very, very slow growing plant. It grows 1 to 2 centimeters a year. I've heard maybe 4 to 5, depending on where they're growing, but not very fast. They live a very long time, up to 450 years, and they can grow to be 6 meters tall. They may or may not have a stem that's above ground. Some species have stems that are below ground, and I've got pictures of them. And the stem is actually underground, and the grass part of the plant looks like it's growing on the ground, as compared to these beautiful plants that have these glorious stems and are able to grow high into the sky. So one of the things that these plants have in common with the eucalyptus, the roots are able to form associations with the mycorrhizal fungi, and as a result, the grass tree, one of the reasons it's able to colonize harsh environments. So it and the eucalypt have that advantage. Nitrogen fixation is the advantage that the acacia and the casuarinas have. I just wanted to show you a few more pictures of the grass tree because I could look at pictures of the grass tree forever. Just gorgeous. This picture was taken on Gari, Fraser Island again, and these xantharia are growing on sand. And so we have a whole chorus line here. They're just thriving. And here's some xantharia in Wallam, back to our Wallam habitat. We have the grass trees There on the ground, we have right here in the center, we have Casuarina here to the right. We have Banksia on the left of that picture, and a little bit further back, we can see the Banksia seed cones that are older, um, but they are still on the tree. On the right-hand picture, we have our scribbly gum, Eucalyptus racemosa. Actually, yeah, and the caption refers to the Xanthorrhea johnsoni that is growing right next to the eucalypt and making for, again, a beautiful display of resilience and hardiness in the landscape. Here's the xanthorrheas, the grass trees in the dry eucalypt forest, again looking like sentinels up the hill a little bit on the right-hand side. Real long decaying grass, not decaying grass, decaying leaves, forming quite a long skirt around the stem with these. And on the left-hand side, in opposition, we see another species, latifolia, that's growing right on the ground. And it has a stem, but the stem is underground. And we also see that one plant at least is throwing up a flower stalk in preparation to blooming a little bit later on. One last habitat shot. This is the grass tree in the montane habitat. And as I said, quite thin soils there because the soil is on top of the bedrock. But again, we have the grass trees that are thriving. So let's talk about the trunk or the stem of the grass tree a little bit, because that's a really kind of a cool story. And the stem of the grass tree, and you can see the picture on the left-hand side, is, and it's nicely hollow, and it's kind of broken. And so that means we have a really good view of it. So what it's made of, the stem is made of the leaf bases that are stuck together. So the leaves will die, decay, but the base will remain. And the tree produces a resin that will stick those bases together, hold them in place, and make them strong. And with time, those leaf bases will accumulate one on top of the other and grow taller and taller. So, which leads to a stem, okay, that becomes very high, okay, like this one and like some of the other ones that we've seen. Now, we have to think about how the plant actually survives. So it has vascular tissue, which allows for the movement of water and sugars and other nutrients up and down the plant between the leaves and the roots. And so that's called vascular tissue. And the vascular tissue is actually found in the center of the stem here. And kind of lucky enough to find an example where we still can see the remnants of some vascular tissue there in the middle. The other stem on the far left, the vascular tissue has completely decomposed, so we don't see it. So that is the stem. Let's talk about the flowering that happens with this plant. On the far left, we have a flower stalk, and you can see that. It's immature though. So when it does finally mature, it looks like the middle slide, and where the flowers have emerged and they are mature. They're on the flower spike near the tip. And the spiky parts of the flower are the stamens. And it's the stamens of this plant that are dominant. The pistil, the female part, is really small and it's located in the center of these spiky stamens. And as we've seen over and over, the flower spike is composed of many separate flowers that are individually placed on the spike and individually bloom. A lot of nectar is produced by this flower spike, which attracts animals. So we have insects that are doing the pollinating, we have birds, we have bats, we have mammals that are doing the pollinating. And finally, after pollination is accomplished, we have formation of, guess what? Our woody seed capsule that protects the seed. The seed is inside. And when the seed is mature, the capsule will open and the seed will be released. And apparently, one flower spike can produce 10,000 seeds, up to 10,000 seeds that will be then released into the environment after the seeds are mature. Let's talk about fire, because it wouldn't be Australia if a plant didn't have fire adaptations. So the grass, trees, and fire. One really cool thing is that the grass trees seem to be stimulated to flower after fire. So if you have a bushfire in the summer, the following spring, you get an upwelling of flower spikes, of flowers that are apparently stimulated by the fire of the season before. And one of the reasons why this might happen is that, of course, when fire happens, ash is created, and the ash being more nutrient rich with minerals, and they provide nutrition to the plant, and the plant more able perhaps to and has more energy to produce the flower spikes and the flowers. We have a picture down below. That wasn't mine. I found it on the internet, but it kind of seems to, you know, explain that principle. We have what looks like a fire blackened landscape, but we have a grass tree, a xanthoria growing. We see some grass like leaves growing, but we see a flower spike that has come up. And in a different landscape, you'll see many more of those flower spikes after fire. The plant itself, even if the leaves are gone, even if the stem is gone, the living growth point of the plant is located underground and protected by the leaf bases. So it will grow and regenerate after fire. It survives fire. In the culture, well, we're talking about a plant that is a survivor, a plant, as I said, that was ancient, it's hardy, it's resilient, colonizes the most challenging of environments and thrives. And for Aboriginal peoples, we can really imagine how important the flower stalk was to them um, for in the construction of spear shafts, and they were used in both hunting and in fishing. As well, the resin that the plant produces to stick those leaf bases together, that was used by Aboriginal peoples as well as glue. And what they would do is they would take the flower stalk and use it as the shaft of a spear, and then they would attach something sharp to the end of that shaft, and they would attach it using the resin as glue. The seed pods were used as cutting tools. A sweet drink was made from the nectar-rich flowers. And something that I just found out yesterday, which is kind of cool, which is kind of part of
Uh-huh.
Australian culture, is this $2 coin in the bottom right of the screen. It has a grass tree image on it, right to the right of the two. It has an Aboriginal man on the face of the coin as well, and it has a grass tree. And I think that's just to kind of that shows it reflects the importance of the grass tree to Aboriginal culture, and is really fun to see. And the stars up above, I think they indicate the Southern Cross. And the grass tree, as far as I know, is the only plant that's found on any Australian coins. What's next? So this is it. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about some of these most iconic plants. Thank you so much for listening. That's me for scale in the picture, standing next to the tallest and the widest grass tree I have ever seen and may ever see. It was a thrill, let me tell you. And so with that, I thank you for listening.
So.
So Bob, you're gonna have to moderate now. There
Okay,
might be
well,
some questions that people will have for me. I'd be happy to answer.
I, I have one that I'll just the Frankia bacteria. That's one I think like Frankia. I think is in alder as well, like our
Mhm.
alders. So is that would you wouldn't happen to know how closely related that one might be to ours, would you? Or
That particular bacteria, well, Frankia, I guess, would be the genus of the
yeah,
bacteria. So they would be the same genus, probably, probably not the same species, obviously, but
yeah,
kind of neat that they both exist, one here and one far away in Australia. Yeah, to do that nitrogen, really important nitrogen fixation role
yeah.
for the plant.
So you, it's hard to come up with questions because you're pretty comprehensive. You covered everything.
So there was a lot of detail. I hope not too much, but I would just read more and then just go deeper and deeper and deeper into this fascinating, weird, and wonderful world. Paris said last week that she likes the weird, and there was quite a bit of weird tonight.
Yeah.
And I hope she's satisfied by the weird. Yeah, weird and wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, they certainly are. And I hope that some of you get a chance to see them in real life. But at
Okay.
least I'm really super happy to have been able to share some of my photographs with you.
Jeremy has a question for you.
Thanks, Sheila. That was really awesome. I'm sorry I missed the
Just to
one last week.
comment that some of the plants you showed, I've been to Australia bird watching, but I have to admit, not really looking for the plants a whole month in 2015.
Hmm.
But what I did notice was that some of them reminded me of century plants or yucca plants in the arid parts of the Southwest.
Hmm.
I don't believe that the names don't indicate a connection, except for the acacia trees.
Right. No, the yucca is not native to Australia. It has been planted as an ornamental in Australia
Mhm.
and not, it hasn't, well, no, I don't think it's become invasive, but it's definitely been planted as an ornamental.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, Australia kind of suffers from the same problem that we do here in North America, where we don't value our native vegetation as much as we really should. So we clear the land, we fertilize the land, and then we plant exotic ornamentals. And so
Mm,
that's really been the history in Australia as well. They're starting to get away from that, which is great. And, there are some habitats that are so fragile, so vulnerable, especially that Wallum habitat,
hmm.
coastal habitats. And they're also particularly vulnerable to development by
Yeah.
houses, by people, because of course everybody wants to live on the coast. So you mostly see those really fragile habitats in national parks now.
Mhm.
There's beginning to be a bit of a shift in the culture where people are starting to value the native vegetation, as I said, and they're starting to even, allow it to be or to replant on their own properties. But it's an uphill battle there as well.
That's, I
Yeah.
really enjoyed your presentation so much. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for your comments. Yeah. And Jeremy, you had, I think, a question too.
I just wanted to ask about the grass trees. You said the stems are hollow. Is that after they die the pith disappears, or I'm just curious about the vascular tissue. Is that actually like the center of the stem, or is it
Exactly.
around the outside of the hollow in the
No,
middle? I'm just
no.
curious.
No, it is in the middle. It's in the
Okay.
center. That
Yeah.
vascular tissue's in the center. And it's really hard to imagine because it decays, I think, after the tree dies, that central vascular tissue decays quite quickly, more quickly than the leaf basis, than the trunk will decay. So it'll appear to be empty in the center, but that's only because the vascular tissue has decomposed and it's no longer there and it's no longer visible. So, those stems, they look like the trunk of a tree, but they're really not because, as you know, with the trunk of the tree, you've got the vascular tissue very, very just underneath the bark on the outside, right? With this grass plant, it's the opposite. You've got the vascular tissue in the center of the plant. So that's a very different thing. But it's pretty cool, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's so cool.
And I think you mentioned that the eucalyptus has come over to this continent. Have vague memories that maybe I've seen them in Los Angeles.
That's right.
Um, have there any other plants come over onto this continent?
That's a good question. A lot of eucalypts, too many eucalypts, and they're contributing to the wildfires that are happening in California now.
Ah,
The rest of the ecosystem is not as fire adapted as the eucalypts are, so they're really, really destructive in other habitats. They have, so that's eucalypt. The Eucalypt grandis is the most popular tree because it grows very quickly. I'm just trying to think. Acacias, I think I mentioned, they were exported as well. I remember reading they were exported to South Africa so that they could extract tannins from the bark of the acacias. So, what else did we talk about? So, we had eucalypts, we had acacias, we had casuarinas today, we had the grass trees. So, of the ones that we spoke about today, so it would be primarily species of eucalypt that were exported, but also some acacias that have been exported. Last week, we talked about the rainforest trees, the Araucaria trees, and they are really great timber trees too. And they have, I believe, been exported as plantation trees to be grown elsewhere in other countries as well. And they're also grown in plantations in Australia. So yeah, so that's kind of long-winded response to your question, but I think when they can export a resource to another country, they will. And, it's the same problem with a species that doesn't belong in that new habitat, colonizing the new habitat. So becoming invasive, we have that problem here as well with so many species. And in the case of the eucalypt, that extra added piece of it being so susceptible to fire.
I
And
I
such a
think the tea tree is also invasive in
yeah,
Florida. I think, and it has the same fire problems as eucalypt as well.
yeah, yeah, that would make sense. And of course, the macadamia nut tree has been exported all over to started off to Hawaii, South Africa. Now I think it's the biggest producer of macadamia nuts in the world. Australia is second. Mhm.
so it's not the solution to a warming climate.
No, no, no. Well, I think the problem with the warming climate is that it's happening so quickly that adaptations that take millions and millions of years to occur aren't able to occur. And do we really want the world to be populated by eucalypts or by acacias? I mean, do we really want that? I would say no. That would be a real shame to lose native vegetation that way. And in fact, even up to now, that's been a problem in other countries where they will cut down native vegetation to plant these non-native species, usually for economic gain. And so they disrupt the ecosystems in other countries quite significantly that way too.
Marion, yes.
Okay, I have another comment on the eucalyptus because it has been planted in Spain and it is a real problem there because of chemicals that the tree spreads and it kills all the other vegetation around it. So
Oh,
it's kind of chemical warfare what it does. So it's a problem.
That's interesting. That makes me think of what I was reading about the exudates that the eucalyptus produces to to break down the nutrients that are bound up in the soil. So I wonder if some of those exudates are what you're talking about that have a negative effect on other species around it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I just know it's chemical warfare going on there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a shame. Hmm. Yeah, when you mess around with Mother Nature, you don't know what effects are going to occur. Some of them really unanticipated.
Let me, Hi there. My name's Jeff. I just want to ask a question about eucalyptus too, or just make a comment. I'm quite sure I saw a lot of big eucalyptus trees about 15 years ago when I was in Bolivia and sort of in the Alti plant, like in El Alto and La Paz. And would they, are all the eucalypts from Australia, or would they be native to South America too? Or are those introduced, do you think?
They are definitely introduced.
Okay.
So there's about 800 odd species of eucalypts. And all but a handful of those are native to Australia.
Mm.
And the ones that are not native to Australia and endemic to Australia, so they grow naturally only in Australia, the ones that aren't, species that aren't endemic to Australia, they are native to some of the islands just north of Australia.
Mhm.
So anything that's been transported to Europe or to South America or to anywhere else in the world has been introduced to those other areas. Yeah.
Do you,
Yeah, it's amazing, huh?
yeah, and as we think about horticulture and or commerce or whatever, and just the spread of plants around the planet, do you know, are there any species of plant endemic to Australia uh that can live in the Nova Scotia climate and that have been planted here, even just this horticultural stuff? I
Hmm.
can't think of any, but I don't know.
I would say, I mean, the only place where they might have freezing and they might have snow would be south of Australia and Tasmania. So it's perhaps possible, although I can't speak to it for sure, that something that grows down there could survive in our climate. Um, it's interesting, but I really don't know. You see, we have snow, we have frost, we have long periods of freezing temperatures, and so that would kill most of the species in Australia,
Yeah.
if not all. There's an interesting story, though. Last week we talked about the araucarias and the rainforest trees. We talked about the bunyip pine. We talked about the Norfolk Island pine. One that we didn't talk about is an araucaria that's native to the higher altitudes in Chile in South America. It's called the monkey puzzle tree.
Yeah, I just saw some in Vancouver.
Yes, exactly. Aren't they? They're amazing trees, and they grow out in BC, in southern BC. And because they don't get in BC, they have a milder climate. They don't get the long periods of freezing temperatures that we do in the rest of Canada. So some of those species will grow there. Even palm trees will survive the
Yeah.
winter there, but they don't grow anywhere else in Canada. So if an Australian species was going to grow anywhere, I would think that, that southern southwest BC would be the best place for them to grow. Yeah, but of course we can grow anything indoors,
Yeah.
all
I mean,
sorts of.
I've seen a few Australia, like even at, you can buy little baby eucalyptus plants if for, as an annual, you can
Yeah,
buy them sometimes. But
sure. So
this,
plant them, yeah, put them outdoors in the summer, let them die, or bring them indoors in the winter and grow them in a pot, which is pretty cool when you think of it too, to have, a piece of those ancient trees growing in a pot in your living room, or something from Australia growing in a pot. I probably, even though I did bring some grass tree seeds home, I haven't planted them, but I might plant them or buy some more. But they're so super slow growing, I'd probably be dead before they were of any height. So they might not be the best tree to try or the best plant to try in a pot.
just to follow the rabbit hole of the monkey puzzle for a minute, I have seen some monkey puzzle trees growing in the ground in Nova Scotia. There's uh, it, at in Shelburne, there's a nursery that has a couple that are small, but they're surviving year by year. And there's one in a front yard in a house in Yarmouth. It's been a few years since I've been there, but I always like to check in and take a look. And there's a 10-foot tall monkey puzzle tree on someone's front yard in Yarmouth.
No way. That
Just
is so
mild enough
cool.
that it's carrying on.
Exactly. That is so cool. Wouldn't
Yeah.
you like that to have one in your front yard or your
Yeah, me
backyard?
too. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
it speaks to the mild temperatures and maybe the little microclimate that they've created around
Yeah.
the trees in the southern parts of Nova Scotia. Yeah, that's neat. I mean, I could talk monkey puzzle. I could talk monkey puzzle all day. I mean, I could talk any of these trees all day.
Yeah.
They're just so
I,
wild and wonderful.
I was in Vancouver a month ago and I took a picture of every monkey puzzle tree I saw and a few selfies with them. Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. You should take one home. Or you said they're selling them somewhere in a nursery in Nova Scotia. What was that again? In Shelburne
Well,
area?
it's been a while since I've seen one for sale, but they've got a couple planted in their garden at
Okay, they do.
Cosby's Garden Center in the big gardens and the sculpture garden they have there
Okay.
in is that Shelburne or
And
Liverpool? I think it's Liverpool. I forget.
Okay. Okay. But they do sell them in nurseries in BC, so you can buy a little one there and transport it home if you want
Mhm.
and try it in a pot.
I remember looking once at Tasmania, and the coldest I could find there was like a zone 7. It doesn't,
Okay.
I think the South Island of New Zealand would get colder, but it's a little further south. But
Right.
yeah, there was nothing in Australia that really directly corresponds to our climate. Yeah.
Because we're about a zone 4, I think, here in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, depending which part. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas out in BC, Victoria would be maybe what, a zone 7 of zone 8?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
yeah.
Victoria would probably be compatible with Tasmania, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah.
zone 5 rather in Yarmouth.
Yeah.
And I had a very elderly friend when I lived in Yarmouth who said that her grandfather brought some of the first exotic trees to Yarmouth. And one of the first was magnolia tree. So the wives of all the other sea captains started this idea of wanting exotic trees. So a great many, and that might be, Jeff, where your trees started. But if you go up on one of the back streets and ask for the old Hilton Mansion, there are quite a few exotic trees there. And I believe there may have been a couple brought from Australia. That was it
Interesting.
was a one-upmanship who could have the most exotic trees.
Wow. That's a great story about the sea captains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask what you'll be focusing on this time with your visit. Do you have some old favorite spots you go back to, or will you be exploring a little further afield?
Well, I think one old favorite spot would be Bunya Pine National Park. Is to go back there, and it's about a 3-hour drive inland, still on the Great Dividing Range, mountain range, subtropical rainforest. So would love to go back there because I was there in 2020 when COVID was starting, and so everything was basically closed down. And it would be really great to go back and to be able to go into the visitor center and buy some bunya seeds and that kind of thing. So thinking of going there. And I'm really starting to think it's time for me to get into the outback. You know, I mentioned that I had borrowed from a friend the photographs of the acacia in the outback areas. So I think it would be really fun to just go in there at least once and just experience the dry. Mhm. Even though I'm more of a rainforest person, I think, the botany and the other place I want to go in Australia is Western Australia because it is an area of huge richness and biodiversity. So in Southwest, kind of in the areas and the parks around Perth are definitely for botanists the place to go and explore. Most of the Banksia species, for instance, are there. Like 90% of the Banksia species are located in WA. So yeah, there's no end. It's a huge country and there's lots of plants. There's no end to it. Yeah, thank you
Well,
for asking.
how long will you be away this time?
So this time it'll be between, it's always about 2.5 to 3 months. Yeah, which is a good amount of time. But it took me like 3 visits to really start to understand what was happening botanically with the trees and the adaptations. So I've just been adding every year. It's been really great to be able to add on. And it's really been, it's really helped. You know, you go somewhere else and you see things that are new, then you bring that back to where you live. And it's really helped me appreciate our own species more. So we tend to take our own for granted, right? Because it's our own and it's what we're used to. So being exposed to something that's so different and so unique has been, it's really broadened, you know, it's really broadened my education, the way they say travel does in general, right? So it's been fun. Yeah.
Tonight you didn't really talk about whether you are exploring with a local group, but remind me what who the experts are that you're learning from or trying to learn from
Yeah.
as you make your travels.
Yeah, there's a lot of experts out there, let me tell you. I'm involved with the Noosa Parks Association,
Okay.
and I don't know if you've heard of Noosa. It's very much a vacation destination in Southeast Queensland. You've heard of the Gold Coast, right?
Yeah, I have had the privilege of being in Australia. We camped at Fraser and
Oh,
went to
fun.
Riley's, and then we did the loop as far as the airlines would take us, I think 10,000 kilometers or miles, I forget which, as we were departing after a year's sabbatical at the ACT, but focused more on birds, I must confess, so not so much on the flowers, but WA would be a go-to place for me if I get a chance. Yeah,
Yeah. That's right. Absolutely. And, you know, the East Coast as well, the oldest rainforest in the world is located in the northeast part of the country, north of Cairns. It's called the Daintree Rainforest, and it's 180 million years old. So that's another spectacular area to see as well. So there's just so much, but that's fun that you got to Australia, so you know a little bit about what I'm talking about for sure. And
Yeah.
I mentioned Noosa because they're very heavily involved with conservation in that area. They have a parks association that they've had, I think, since the 70s. And they have lots of land care where they do work on rehab of the coastal habitats, the coastal environment. They remove invasive species and they do planting of native species. And it's very much supported by the councils of the little towns. And it's quite well organized. Like they're better organized than we are here around that invasive species removal piece and rehabilitation of native vegetation piece. So it's really quite impressive to work with them. And so
We,
I've been doing that.
we could take lessons from them then. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Our our invasive species council is struggling, I think, to spread the word, whether it's land, water, invasive species. Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you and enjoy.
Okay, thank you very much for your interest. I appreciate it. And somebody went to the Daintree, was amazing. The folks at Red Mill House were great botanists. So that was a comment that was put in the
That's
chat.
Joan, yeah.
It was Joan who got up to the Daintree. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm really happy to have been able to present. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, I got to say this was our first two-part presentation, I think, and I'm still hungry for more, you know.
Me too.
Because I mean, there's still so much more in Australia, right? All the herbaceous plants and stuff like the stuff. it's such an amazing, amazing place. So,
Yeah,
but I love the detail you went into, Sheila. Like it was, because little bits and pieces I've heard of before, but there's always something new you're presenting that really made it fascinating. Particularly a lot of the fire adaptations and stuff like that. I really enjoyed that.
right. Yeah. Well, you're so welcome. And I just kind of figured that what I found fascinating and interesting, other people might too. So
Yeah.
that kind of guided me in the way that I put it together. And the detail really interested me for sure. Yeah. And I know there's lots more to say. And the rainforest is a whole other habitat to explore. And as you
Oh
say, the
boy.
herbaceous
Yeah.
plants as well. So yeah, there's a lot there.
I think then if there's nothing else, we'll probably call it an evening then.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And really, for all the work you put into this too, Sheila, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome.
And I'd like to thank my Australian botany friends from the Noosa Parks Association and from the Wallam Group. They have all been extremely welcoming and so generous with their time and with their knowledge, and I've learned so much. And I should say that any inaccuracies in the content of my presentations is on me and me alone. And thanks too to my daughter Ariane. I could not have done this presentation without her, especially for her help with slides and with formatting. Thanks again.